Hi, everyone. We are so excited to have you here today for the CACE Summer Session 1. Now, the purpose of these summer sessions, as your teachers might have indicated before, is to jumpstart the We the People program so that you're ready to hit the ground running as soon as the school year starts. This is a program that's near and dear to many of our hearts as CASE volunteers. And so we are really excited to be here and to help you through this program. Before we get started on all of the details and to talk through everything we have today, I would like everyone who's case to introduce themselves. I want everyone to say their name, what they're up to these days, if you're an alum, what year you were an alum of, and what unit you were in. And I would also like everyone to include a fun fact. So I will go first. And then I'll pass it on to someone else and we'll just call on the people who have CASE in their name. So my name is Sabrina McGraw. I am president of CASE, which stands for Californians Advancing Civic Education. I am an attorney in San Francisco at the law firm Covington and Burling. I am an alum of the program from 2013. I was in Unit 5. And my fun fact is that I am a member of my law firm's band, rock band called Cover Band, and I play the tenor saxophone. And we perform once a year for charity events. All right, I'm going to pass this on to Sean.
I had no idea you were in a band or that you played tenor saxophone, so that's exciting. Um,
That's what fun facts are for.
yeah, that's great. I'm Sean Gentry. I'm an alum of the program from 2002, and I graduated from Foothill High School back then. I've been volunteering with the program, with the We the People program, since about 2007, so coming up on 20 years now. I've been judging, various competitions since shortly after that point, and I've been working with CASE for about 10 years, a little over 10 years, and I'm on the board. I'm also an attorney. I practice employment law, and I've been doing that for about 15 years, and I really like it. So, always happy to answer questions from all of you later on about what it might be like to be a lawyer, go to law school after college, all that kind of stuff. My fun fact is that I used to be a competitive ballroom dancer. Uh, a long time ago, but I was an amateur collegiate level competitive ballroom dancer. I did ballroom and Latin dancing and I was reasonably good. And one of my partners actually ended up going pro, but she was much better than me. Um, and so that's my fun fact. And I'll pass it to Tiffany.
Hi everyone, I'm Tiffany. I'm a rising 2L at Harvard Law. I was Unit 5 at Amador 2018. And my fun fact is I actually saw Sabrina a few weeks ago because I'm joining her firm next summer. So I'm super excited about that.
Awesome.
Um, and I will pass it on to Elise.
Thanks, Tiffany. Hi, everyone. My name's Elise. I'm an alum of the program from 2018 with Tiffany in Unit 3. I am currently working for a nonprofit called What Works Cities. We work with cities in North, South, and Central America on building up more robust data practices to inform better policy decisions. And I'm actually going back to school to get my Master's of Public Policy in the fall at Berkeley. Um, I hate the fun fact question, but I will say I'm an AMC A-lister. I recommend it to everyone who can. And so I saw over 60 movies in theaters last year. And I'll go ahead and pass it to Erin.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Aaron. I'm also an alumni of the program. I was on the Foothill team in 2019, where I was on Unit 6. I am currently in graduate school. I'm at UC Davis getting my PhD in geography. And a fun fact about me is that this morning I ran my first 5K, so that's exciting. I'll pass it over to Jim.
Hi, my name is Jim McGraw. As you might have guessed, Sabrina is my daughter, and that's the reason I got involved in the program. I'm retired. I worked for 36 years at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in computer science. So I'm not a lawyer, and you may find out that my questioning reflects the fact that I take a very different perspective on a bunch of these questions than the lawyers do. My fun fact is, oh, many years ago, like 1993, I spent a year in Washington, D.C. on assignment, and my uh, position was officially, I was part of the Executive Office of the President of the United States. Spent a year there doing computer science technology support. So that's my fun fact. And let's see, Ernest, I don't see him there. Are you there, Ernest? I don't see
He
anybody
was there a
else.
second ago. He might have had to step away.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe we can have Ernest if he comes back, but let's have the Case Foothill alumni panel introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm a alumni from Foothill last year, and I was with Unit 5.
Oh. Hi, I'm Tanvi. I was also in Unit 5 last year. I'm Jessica. I was Unit 1. Hi, I'm Elena. I was Unit 6.
And my name is Nathan Wu. I was Unit 4 last year.
Okay, great. So we'll get started.
Why don't we
And
have Ernest go real quick? Hi, Ernest. Do you
oh,
want
is
to
Ernest
introduce
here?
yourself?
Oh, hi. I'm also Unit 5 from Foothill last year.
Welcome.
Welcome. Okay. Did I miss any other case folks? I think I got everyone. Okay. Great. So we'll go ahead and get started. And first on the agenda, aside from introductions, is what does CASE do? So as you might have heard from people who are recent alum in the past, CASE is a nonprofit. It is technically separate from the We the People program, but we are a network of volunteers who are designed to help all schools in California. Now, I think mostly we have Amador and Foothill folks today, but just so everyone knows, we help every school in California that asks for it. And so we often run practices. So we do a couple of different things. First, we put on these summer sessions. As I said, they're designed to help jumpstart the program. There are 3 sessions. This is the first one, which is going to cover sort of the basics about the program and show you a little bit about what to expect. And then the next 2 sessions are going to be a little bit more substantive to give you a preview of what the content is of a few of the different units. All 3 of these summer sessions are going to be posted on YouTube. Not any of our breakout sessions, but the content, so everything I'm saying today. So no need to take detailed notes. You can always go back to the YouTube video once we upload it, and you'll be able to go from there. But just letting everyone know, it will be on YouTube, and that a lot of students, including at other schools, will be viewing the YouTube at a later point and may not be participating in person. So everyone say hi to everyone who's listening in on YouTube. Hi. Okay. Um, so aside from the summer sessions, CASE supports at both the competitions and during practices. So we offer practices for each school whose teacher offers it, who permits it, and we do Zoom practices where everyone will get to try out all of the different testimonies they have. We'll provide substantive feedback as judges and do basically mock presentations. It's a great way to prepare ahead of competitions, including at the regional, district, regional, and state level. Many of our CASE volunteers are actually judges for those competitions. CASE puts on the district and regional NorCal competitions, and many of our judges participate in the state competition. And so we pride ourselves in doing that. And then once you all become alumni, you'll be invited to become a part of CASE and pass on all of your knowledge and stay involved. So we hope you have a good first summer session. And you'll be seeing a lot from us going forward. One other thing is we have a Discord channel where if your teacher opts into it, you can ask us questions directly. We'll get that set up once your school year starts. And you can ask questions of us, send testimonies, whatnot. If your school doesn't opt for the Discord channel, we will still be available via email, and your teachers will have our emails, and you'll be able to reach out and ask questions that way and provide testimony. So we'll be hopefully in contact with you all a lot throughout the year and want to support. Does anyone have anything to add? Sean, I saw you wanted to go off of mute for a second.
I was going to say Discord, but you got to it before you finished talking.
Okay, great. Okay, so I think we're gonna head right into the content with Elise, who is going to talk about how a hearing works. So Elise is going to be presenting on that topic, but I invite all CASE volunteers to chime in as needed about their experiences and background going forward. Okay, Elise, I will share my screen so that you can use it, if that's
Perfect.
okay.
Thank you. So for the summer sessions, we like to start out by kind of just answering the big question, which is what in the world are you all going to be doing during We the People this year? And what does it mean to compete in a We the People competition? So we're going to start out by kind of going through what does it mean to be in a unit and what do those units focus on? And then we'll switch to talking about what is a simulated congressional testimony and what are you expected to do as competitors during those testimonies. So the first and foremost, when we all introduced ourselves, we also called out what unit we were in, if we were in a unit. So in We the People, there are 6 units that you could be a part of. Each of those units have from 3 to 6 students working together on content based off of the unit and the unit type. So Sabrina, if you scroll down a little to show all the units, yeah, that fits. So there are 6 units. I'm going to actually start at the bottom of the document talking about unit 1 and then making my way up. But all of these units at its core addresses different concepts that relate to the Constitution or constitutional history. Unit 1 is much of the underpinning of when we talk about where did ideas in our Constitution come from, and then also moving forward throughout our history in the United States, where have philosophical ideas influenced how decisions have been made or how we can interpret those decisions. So Unit 1 looks at historical and philosophical foundations of government. Unit 1, I feel like, is very foundational in the sense that even if you're not in Unit 1, you will still be learning and being able to apply ideas from philosophers. So moving up, if we think about units 2, 3, 4, and 5, you'll also still be touching on those like historical and philosophical foundations. From Unit 1, we jump to Unit 2, which looks at the framing of the Constitution. This looks pretty in depth into 2 things. The first being, who are the framers and why did they have the opinions they have? We talk about the framers of the Constitution as this single body, but we all know that there's a lot of infighting and disagreement and pettiness and drama that came to create what the Constitution is today. So Unit 2 looks at the framing of the Constitution, both from who were the framers and why did they have the opinions they have, and then also what were the historical backgrounds that influenced the creation of the Constitution. Then jumping from Unit 2 to Unit 3, Unit 3 is referred to either as voting, due process, equal protection, and civil war. It's also referred to as changes made after the Bill of Rights. So this kind of encompasses many different things, but first and foremost, really looking at the radical changes that happened in our constitutional history after the Civil War. So the Civil War amendments are the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments, and those greatly influenced both who is considered a citizen within the United States and what rights do citizens have both at the state and federal level. So a lot of questions around Unit 3 are about the Civil War amendments, voting, political parties, and due process. Unit 4 looks at the institutions of the US government. So the 3 branches of the federal government, as well as federalism. So the relationship that we have between the state government and federal government. Unit 5 looks at the Bill of Rights and how the Bill of Rights have influenced and court decisions have influenced how we view rights in the United States. So the Bill of Rights, so Unit 5 is incredibly court case heavy of all the units. So you're looking really at how have we viewed freedom of speech. How has that changed across our history? What rights do we have on schools or college campuses when it comes to the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression? And then also looks at other amendments as well, such as the Fourth Amendment or Fifth Amendment due process as well. And then Unit 6 is kind of at the top of this little graph because it kind of gives a very like all-encompassing broad look at how current events today influence all these ideas we have about the Constitution. And also we know that the United States is not isolated. So how is the US and the decisions we make influencing other countries? How does our Constitution influence other countries' constitutions? And then also, there's a lot of foreign policy at play for Unit 6 as well. So, what decisions should the United States be making when it comes to engaging in conflict or choosing not to engage in conflict? So Unit 6, like Unit 1, you'll see in this graph, is very all-encompassing. And that's because even if you're in Units 1 through 5, you still need to be able to talk about all the current events that are happening today. So there's a lot of like building blocks that we see between like a Unit 5 talking about the Bill of Rights and Unit 6 talking about citizen and society in a globalized world as well. Are there any questions or anything I missed as well from any of the CASE volunteers?
So I would just add that Ernest has a funny plate. I would just add that whether you're assigned to one unit or a different unit, you do want to pay some attention to all the other units. There's a lot of intertwinedness, if that's a word, between the various units, and some of them really mesh directly. So, like Unit 1 and Unit 6 are sometimes considered sister units, for example. And so, one thing you'll want to do throughout the year is focus heavily on your content, but reach out to your classmates and learn from them about what they're evaluating and analyzing in their own units, because a lot of times that will give you knowledge that helps you do better in your competition in your unit.
And just to add to that, when I was in the program and I was participating in the national competition, I was in Unit 5, and a judge asked us a question that was a purely Unit 4 question, it had nothing to do with the topic at issue. But luckily, I had been paying attention to our Unit 4's presentation and all the evidence they had. And so on the fly, I was able to just regurgitate what my Unit 4 mates had been saying in one of their presentations without having actually read the materials, and they thought it was an excellent answer. So you never know when that situation is going to come up, and so it behooves you not only to be talking to the other units on your team, but also to be listening really closely when they're doing presentations, as opposed to using it as downtime. Like actually pay attention because they're doing a lot of the work for you.
Awesome. Yeah. Tiffany and I, for example, were in sister units our year. And so there was a lot of really great opportunities where we were able both to dig into the questions together because each unit comes in with their different perspectives as well. Awesome. Sabrina, if you want to scroll down to the next page. So we've covered now what are the units. What are the 6 units that you could be put into when you're doing We the People? But that still doesn't answer the question, what are you actually doing? So We the People is based off of a congressional hearing structure. And so you probably have all seen or heard of congressional hearings in the news recently, whether it be the Department of Defense and the use of signal chats, or congressional hearings just about important topics, whether it be around the use of AI or environmental protections or concerns. So the idea behind a congressional hearing at its core is having experts come and answer a question. And so We the People kind of also follows that same spirit. So a congressional hearing starts by introductions. So the judges will come in and introduce themselves. And you all will be asked to introduce yourselves as well. In your units, you'll all work together to work on that introduction. It's a fun, little silly, performative part of We the People. But then the judges will come forward with these questions. And so you all in your units will have worked on 3 questions, and judges or the competition itself will choose which question you will be answering that day. So at the start of a hearing, the judges will share what question you will all be working on. This then brings us to the first like meaty part of the We the People congressional hearing, which is your prepared congressional testimony. Some schools call it arguments. And so this is the prepared statement. So in We the People, each question has an umbrella question or an overarching question, and then two sub questions as well. During that prepared testimony, you'll be answering both the main umbrella question as well as the two sub questions. So in all your practice time and your lead up to competitions, most of your time, a lot of your time is spent focusing on drafting this congressional testimony. This congressional testimony can be read. Some units like to memorize, some like to be able to be close to memorize by the time of competition. But it doesn't matter as long as the congressional testimony itself is no longer than 4 minutes. So when you all are answering that congressional testimony, you're going to be answering those three questions, and you'll also use evidence and reasoning and logic to build on your unit's argument. This brings us to the question and answer part of the congressional hearing structure. But depending on what competition you're in, this Q&A will either be 6 minutes or it could be up to 10 minutes. For this section, you're not going to have any notes. It's just what you all have learned and researched and practiced throughout your time preparing for competition. Judges will ask questions both about the testimony content or questions related to some of the evidence or other related topics. So for example, if in Unit 3, oftentimes you're getting voting questions. A very common question that the judges might ask is what groups are disenfranchised today and which of these groups should have the right to vote? And then you as a unit will take turns answering these questions. Overall, this should take from 6 to 10 minutes. And then once your 6 to 10 minutes is done, you get to take a very deep breath because you're done with all the important parts of the competition. But there is time for feedback. This is a really great time for in practice, as well as even during competition, to get feedback from the judges about what worked and what didn't from your testimony and your Q&A. Sometimes you'll know as soon as you're saying something in testimony, you're like, ooh, this isn't working. But sometimes it's helpful to hear feedback from judges who have been through this before about what they found to be compelling parts of your argument and what parts of your argument may have room for improvement. Students are able to take notes based off of this feedback. Oftentimes in both practices and case practices, you'll also have your teammates from other units being able to take track of both your questions and the feedback you receive so that you can go back as a team and like work through that feedback as well. This feedback shouldn't take too long, that 3 minutes per judge. You are also always welcome to ask questions if judges say something, especially during practice, that don't really make sense to you. You all should be, we hope you all feel empowered to just like ask questions as well about the feedback you're getting.
Is there any questions about this? And just so everyone knows, I can't see if you're direct messaging me on Zoom right now because I'm screen sharing. So make sure you're sending your questions to the whole group if you have a question.
Actually, Sabrina, I'll say something real quick. If you're following news and what's going on in Washington, D.C., there are a lot of congressional testimony or congressional hearings these days. It's very common in the last few presidential administrations. And, as you get deeper into this, you might start to be interested in what's going on in Washington, D.C. and what those look like. And I would say I definitely encourage you to watch some of those testimonies, and you can kind of see, how congressional representatives ask questions of the people presenting. However, there's a format here where you want to be responsive to the questions. So we want you to be engaging with the judges and actually answering their questions. Something you're going to see a lot in current congressional hearings is what I'll call filibustering, meaning coming in with an agenda and trying to push that on in this case would be the congressional representatives or the judges in your case, or just not answering the question because they don't want to answer the question. And so Don't be like them. Be like what we're telling you to be, and engage with the judges, answer their questions directly. Try to give yes or no answers right away, if it's a yes or no question. And we'll of course appreciate all your expertise.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. I think that actually segues very well into the rubric section. The unlike congressional testimonies that happened today, Mark Zuckerberg is not given a rubric after he's done giving a congressional testimony, but you all are, and we have a rubric that when judging, there's a rubric of across 50 points of how you can score in competition. This, I really recommend everyone when you're starting out writing testimony, when you're going periodically throughout the season, go back and look at this rubric that we're going to share with you all. Sometimes it's really easy to just get so stuck into answering the testimony, answering Q&A, you forget how you're actually being graded at the end of the day. So this rubric is a really helpful way to kind of better understand that rubric as well. And I'll quickly just call out the general layout of a congressional hearing. You're going to have your panel of students on one side. Right across from you will be the panel of judges. Sometimes you're in a very small room. Sometimes you're in a very big room. So depending on how big a room it is, you might have to speak louder. But overall, it's very consistent across competitions.
And just in case not obvious, you're going to be very familiar with this format as you go through the program. It's going to become second nature. And this is the format we're going to be doing for each of the case practices. So you'll always have sort of that under your belt, and you'll know how it will work, except of course we'll be in the Zoom format, which helps us be accessible to all schools in California. Okay. Just checking to make sure I didn't miss any messages. Okay, great. So since we're doing so great on time, I think what we're gonna do is move it around a little bit and actually do a score sheet breakdown because Elise did such a good job of leading us into that topic anyway. So I'm going to pass it off to Jim, and I'm going to share my screen so that we can go through some parts of the score sheet.
All right. Good morning, everybody. So the score sheet is broken down into 6 categories. So we have to provide a score as a judge. We provide a score between 1 and 10 for each one of the 6 categories. And then then the 3 judges' totals are added together, and that's your team score. So, in looking at this, I think it's important to understand where your points are allocated to make sure you don't inadvertently slip up and fail to cover something. So, the first category is the opening statement. While you're going to be doing a lot of preparation for the testimony portion, it turns out 5 of the 6 scores have to do with the Q&A and not the testimony. So this first one is all about the content and the presentation of the testimony. And so in that testimony, what I'm looking for is, and have you answered all 3 questions? And one of the things that will confuse people is, as judges, we don't see your testimony in advance. We're only hearing it. So, and we're hearing it for the first time. So we got 4 minutes to just absorb everything you've said and give you a score for that part of it. So one of the important things is that you cover all 3 parts, the main question and the 2 sub questions. And it's kind of important because we're only listening to it for you to give us very clear, I think some people call it signposts or markers to tell you, when are we dealing with that question? What part of the question? So, because in hearing it, one of the most difficult things is if I get lost and I'm looking at the question and I get lost as to how what you're saying is tying into which part. So having a signpost like saying, okay, either restating the question or restating a key phrase in the sub bullet to say, I'm now working on this one. I would say 75, 80% of the time, you probably want to do the main question first, then the first sub, and then the second sub, and get it all done in the 4 minutes. So, what we're looking at in that part is, have you covered all three sections? Have you answered it? Have you given us the right um, uh, either philosophical backpinnings or the right court cases or the right laws, cited all the relevant stuff? It's really important that everybody participate in the presentation of the opening statement. So a lot of times what I see is um, each student going through a planned thought, and then you bounce around between the three, four, five, six people several times during the course of that testimony. You don't have to do it that way, but you want to make sure, like, so for example, if you have a 3-person group, you could theoretically do one person does the main question, one person does the first sub, and one person does the second sub. It really doesn't matter, but you have to have equal participation in the opening statements. And again, trying to I'm listening for the first time, so trying to make it very clear. This is that last bullet there. Well organized, logical approach to the statements. It makes a huge difference because if I'm leaving your testimony confused about what you said, then it's going to be more difficult for the Q&A portion for me as a judge. So keep that in mind when you practice. Have somebody else listen to your testimony. See what their reaction is. What made sense? What didn't make sense? How did it work? So this is the one score that focuses on your testimony. It'll be 1 through 10. And we're looking at, in some sense, it's subjective in the sense that it all depends on the content and how well you've handled it. But you can get dinged for stupid things like not having a balanced presentation, or you can get dinged because somebody gets confused about which question you're talking about. So that's the number one bullet, number one scoring thing. The remaining 5 all have to do with the Q&A. So that's where you have to be a little bit careful. And I'm going to go through these. All right, where are we at? Evidence. Okay. Most important is, have you cited court cases? Have you cited the relevant laws covering the question? Okay. If it's not one of those types, if it's a philosophical question, have you got the philosophers, the correct philosophers? Where is the basis? Are these ideas coming from? It's important to provide that kind of information. Let's see. And it can be moved forward then to both historical context and current evidence. A lot of times as a judge, there may be a historical question about slavery, and I'll try and bring a question from today about slavery, and just to make you think a little bit more. So your first and foremost issue here is having as much knowledge and background in your back pocket, and everybody on the team should have the full list of stuff, and I'll explain why later. Second one is analysis and understanding. So you have all the court cases, you presented all this stuff. How well do you understand it? I'm going to throw questions at you that may be related to the question that was presented, and some of them may be pretty obviously direct, some of them may not be so obvious, and you may have to sit and think, okay, wait a minute. The judge is not asking this, it's not obvious the tie. So figure out what the connection is to the material that you've been studying. And most of the time, except in the case where Sabrina mentioned it was a Unit 4 question and it had nothing to do with it, that can happen. But in general, judges are going to be trying to figure out how well you actually understand the material. And through your answers, that will be important. Okay, let's move down to let's see, application. Oh, a lot of times then, so sometimes you'll in your testimony you'll hint about some relevant, so for example, birthright case, and you have a chance to mention in your testimony. I may jump on that and say, okay, how is it relevant today on birthright? So, for example, if there are companies that are allowing couples to come into the United States on visas and then have the child in the United States and is born in the United States, officially becomes a citizen. How well do you understand? Is that what the founders intended, or in this case, the amendments? So trying to apply it in a current situation and understand back and forth, that's the critical issue. Discussion. This is an important one. Balanced intellectual engagement. So when we start asking questions, I want to see, I'm looking for several things. I actually keep a score. How many times did each person respond to a question? And then I actually have an extra scoring thing that says, did I really like that answer? Was that an impressive answer? So tick mark this way every time somebody answers, tick mark this way if I really like the answer. You need to have balance among all of the team participants during the presentation. And the only way this can happen is when you do all practices, you should practice every side of every question, and every person should know a response to give. So for example, you don't want one person to be an expert in one area and another person to be an expert in another, and a third in a different area, because if the Q&A hits only the one person, you're going to ding badly on the discussion. And that would be a score killer, unfortunately. So as you prepare, understand all of the different responses that everybody's capable of giving. And if you've spoken a little bit too much early on, maybe back away in your chair and let somebody else jump in, and understanding that's what your team's there for. They can jump in to give your teammates more balance. The other thing with balance is the nature of the questions being asked. I try to tell this to everybody later on, but it's worth mentioning at least now. If somebody asks you a question, if you come into oh, well, the answer is obviously X, and everybody agrees with that, you've missed the point. Almost always there's a counter position, and the more you can present both sides of the issue and demonstrate you understand the pros and cons of each situation, the better your response is going to be. So, for example, if somebody asks, what do you think of X? Please don't come back with, oh, I think this and I think that. Come back with an answer like, okay, here's what X is. This is the issue. Then somebody says, all right, on this issue, here's the law, here's the philosophers, what they say. And on the other side, here's the other part of this picture. Now, given all of this, we agree with this philosopher because of XYZ. So you've shown knowledge, you've shown analysis, you've shown depth of thinking. That's the A plus answer on all of these kinds of questions. And did I hit everything? Okay. I think I've said more than enough. I'm going to be more than willing to let other case people chime in with all the things I missed.
Yeah, I'd like to hit.
Sorry, 1 second before we get into context. I just wanted to let everyone know, like, that was a lot of information. This is not the last time you're going to hear any of this. We're going to be working through the program over the next year with you to really help you digest and understand how to execute and meet all of the goals within this scoring rubric. So if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, that's very normal. You can always come back to watch the YouTube once you have more context, but the purpose of today is really just to expose you to what the rubric is so you're thinking about it as you start going through the program. Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to sort of underscore the last point that Jim made about, what an A plus answer looks like. And in general, you're going to get a lot of questions from judges about what your opinion is or what do you think or, phrase like that, because that's just how judges ask questions. And we do want to know what you think, but we also want to know where that comes from. So, it's sort of interesting what Sean Gentry thinks on a topic. It's much more interesting to hear that I think that because Aristotle said this and John Locke said that, and the US Supreme Court in, 1968, in whichever case, held this, and I think that that was a good decision. So those sort of evidentiary underpinnings to my answer are really important. I think that's a significant part of what Mr. McGraw was just saying. So, don't get caught in the trap of just, saying what your opinion is without supporting it, because ultimately your scores are based on your breadth of knowledge and not specifically an anecdote or an opinion or something like that. So I just wanted to add that, Sabrina. Oh, let me add one other thing, Sabrina, which is to say that sometimes questions will have a really obvious answer. And that's not to say that judges are dumb. Maybe they just want to hear the obvious answer, or they missed something, a fundamental detail. And don't be afraid to say the obvious and don't assume that the judges know what the obvious is. So if Thomas Jefferson, was the author of the Declaration of Independence, like just go ahead and say that, like even if it's sort of a fact that you would hope that all the judges know. And I mention that because sometimes teams want to show how smart they are, and we all think that teams are smart, and we do want to see your breadth of knowledge, but we also don't want you to miss the really key thing that answers the question. So if it's a judicial review question, we want you to say, judicial review was first shown by the Superior Court or the Supreme Court in Marbury versus Madison. Like, great, you've established the foundation, and then you can show this, niche piece of research that you found that nobody else knows. It's going to blow the judges away.
Few other thoughts I had is I think over the process of this program, what you'll find is that you're spending at the very beginning a lot of time in the opening statement and the evidence because that's you're writing something out, so you're spending a lot of time with the opening statement. Then you're like, I don't know anything, and you're spending a ton of time trying to figure out the evidence. That's normal, that's expected, and it's going to take some time for you to build up the knowledge base to be able to have the evidence in place to be able to talk about it during a test during a question and answer period afterwards. That being said, what's really important is once you're feeling more comfortable with the evidence, that's when teams take it up to the next level by understanding how to use it effectively. And that's where the analysis and understanding an application come in. So it's really critical that you're not only just memorizing a bunch of stuff, but you're understanding how to apply it and use it to answer questions from the judges. That might seem obvious now, but I've seen many a team stock up on all this evidence and then just not really understand how to use it, just spew facts. So keeping that in mind and just knowing that all of these different categories aren't going to happen all at once for you all. You're going to be building them at different points in the year. And at some point before the competitions, things will start to come together. But just be patient with yourselves, and know that it's just part of the process. The other thing I just wanted to say is that our future summer sessions will go into a little bit more detail on some of these categories, particularly how to write the opening statement effectively, and also ways that you can gather this evidence and learn, and research issues. So we'll be covering that in a little bit more detail. That's not the last you'll hear of it. Are any other CASE folks wanting to chime in on anything on this? Okay, perfect. So right now, we're doing really great on time. And so what we're going to do is take a 10-minute break. So we're all going to come back at 11:01 a.m. Pacific time for those who are on the West Coast right now. Um, and when we come back, we're going to have a sample alumni hearing where the alum are going to show you, the recent alum are going to show you how to hit all of these boxes on the rubric with a practice question. We'll have judges asking questions, and then the students will also have an opportunity to ask questions if you want as well. So everyone, we'll see you back at 11:01. Thanks. Hey everyone, welcome back. Okay. I just want to let everyone know, since we're being very efficient with our time, we're likely to finish a little bit early, so we'll give you back some of your Saturday. Um, though no promises, but it's looking good. Okay, so as I mentioned before, we are going to head right into a mock panel to show you what this is going to look like once you start the program. And we have generously, folks from the last year who participated in the program have generously donated their time today to do this mock presentation. And so we're going to do the whole thing. We're going to have them introduce themselves. We're going to have a panel of judges read the question. They're going to read their 4-minute testimony. And then we're going to have 6 minutes of Q&A. And then a minute or two of feedback, just so you can all see what it's like. So, the judges today are going to be myself, Elise, and Aaron. I'm going to ask that everyone else for today. Oh, I love this. I'm going to ask that everyone else actually turn off your camera aside from the 3 judges and the alumni panel so that we can all see who's presenting. So, please introduce yourselves.
Good morning. We are Pleasanton's Unit 7, representing the organization Californians Advancing Civic Education. My name is Sean Kwok.
My name is Tanvi Gupta.
My name is Jessica Tai.
My name is Lenny Asti.
And my name is Nathan Wu. At this time, we would like to thank the judges, audience, and timekeeper for being here today, and we would also like to introduce our coaches, Mr. McBride and Mr. Dedamore.
Wonderful. Okay, panel, your question today is, what is We the People? How did We the People impact your understanding of rights, responsibility, and citizenship? You may begin whenever you're ready.
We the People is a civic education program that engages students in a comprehensive study of the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the principles of democratic government. Through this program, students like ourselves have gained a deep appreciation for American democracy and the importance of active citizenship.
The program combines meticulous research with real-world application. We focus on historical documents, Supreme Court cases, and philosophy, developing critical thinking skills and a nuanced understanding of constitutional principles. Our research comes together in this simulated congressional hearing, where we present our knowledge in testimony and defend our positions on complex constitutional issues in a follow-up question and answer period.
The We the People program has instilled in us an understanding of our constitutional rights, their historical context, and their modern-day applications. For instance, we studied the First Amendment's protection of free speech as interpreted in landmark cases like Tinker v. Des Moines Independent Community School District 1969, which upheld students' right to symbolic speech in schools. These rights have transformed our lives and experiences as citizens.
We've learned that rights come with responsibilities and limitations, as exemplified by cases like Schenck v. US 1919, which established the clear and present danger test for limiting free speech. Through studying book bans, limitations on guns, and understanding changing voter rights, we've not only been able to understand our own rights, but moreover, the rights of entities beyond us.
We the People has impacted our notion of citizenship, emphasizing that citizenship is not passive but requires active participation. We've learned the importance of civic engagement, engaging in civil discourse, and our civic responsibilities. The program has given us a deep appreciation for the Constitution as a living, breathing document. We have analyzed how its interpretation has changed history and how it continues to shape our nation today. For example, we've studied how the Commerce Clause, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, has been broadly interpreted in cases like Gibbons v. Ogden, 1824, to expand federal power to regulate the economy.
Through We the People, we've come to understand that civic responsibility extends beyond voting. We've learned about jury duty as a fundamental civic obligation protected in the Sixth and Seventh Amendments.
In addition, we study the role of civil disobedience in shaping public policy, as seen in the civil rights movement. With the recent slew of executive orders, many of which are clearly unconstitutional, We the People has expanded our understanding of today's politics, giving us the tools to critically analyze modern events and the importance of protest as a crucial civic duty. Through the program, we feel more confident that we are able to make informed decisions when protecting our democracy.
We the People taught us about personal responsibilities as well, particularly how to disagree with one another and work with different personalities. When expressing our opinions, we needed to disagree. For example, at Nationals, my unit disagreed on the benefits of the exclusionary rule, where 2 people supported the exclusion of unlawfully obtained evidence, while 3 did not. Writing that testimony taught us how to disagree on a heated issue while still respecting each other. That skill further applies to national political debates, as we're able to understand the other side of the aisle.
We the People have taught us humility, facing the fact that there will always be topics that you won't know about or questions that you're not completely ready to discuss. We the People has taught us that none of us are perfect. We all misremember evidence, freeze up, or lose our patience at points. However, being in this program taught us that it is a part of our responsibility to face our shortcomings and work together as a unit and team in order to address them and uplift each other.
We the People has transformed our understanding of American democracy through abstract concepts to lived experiences. Through We the People, we've gained the tools to participate in and defend a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Thank you.
Thank you. So my first question is, how have you consumed news differently since you first participated in the program? And maybe give some specific examples.
I think personally, I have consumed news differently by looking at all the different perspectives. An important part of what we learned in the program was that there is truth in everything there is some truth in everything that you read, and even if there isn't truth in something, it's important to read it in order to strengthen your own argument. And this idea comes from John Stuart Mill, Trident Theory from On Liberty in 1859, where he explains how we should always look at these different perspectives. And thus, when I'm reading the news now, I do look at different leanings and whether it's right-wing thought or left-wing or somewhere in the middle in order to create a more nuanced idea of what is going on in our society.
Another way that my consumption of media has changed would be to look past the headlines in our social media or even in the news networks. I can see this with the Posse Comitatus Act that President Donald Trump used to federalize the National Guard. With this, I saw various articles on whether or not this was constitutional or unconstitutional. And rather than just looking straight at the headlines and taking in or just following along with the headlines and what the media is saying, I did my own research and looked into how the law has been utilized throughout our nation and developed a opinion for myself.
Hi. So I believe you've all finished 1 year of college or work or whatever you're doing after high school. No, they just graduated. Okay, well, I'll rephrase my question then, which is to say, how do you think CACE, how do you think We the People has prepared you for the next step in your lives, either higher education or your careers?
I think one of the most important ways that We the People help students go into, I guess, the real world would especially be the teamwork aspect and the idea of supporting other people, in this case, our unit mates, through their own shortcomings and trusting that other people will help you when you need that help.
Moreover, it better prepares us to be actively engaged citizens of our country. For example, for the 2024 election, our We the People team, led by our coach, Mr. Dedamore, also ran a student election at our school, simulating what it actually is to feel like to be able to vote in an election and to better prepare us and by providing us voter information or providing the students at the school voter information so that they can also make their own research when in the future voting in future elections.
And adding on to Sean's point, I think that We the People also taught me the better value of hard work. Often in school, hard work translates to grades and things like that are a little bit more surface level. But with We the People, it is more of a fulfilling thing that allows you to truly do something that you want and not just for a letter grade or for a medal.
Thanks. Kind of building on Sean's point, I assume some of you will be going on to college in the next year, and I'm curious to see how, given the contention over civil discourse that's been occurring in college campuses over the past few years and throughout history, what lessons have you learned through the We the People program, and how do you plan to implement that in your time at college if you are going to college?
I think an important thing that we've learned from We the People that we can use in college in order to express our voice is the idea of ordered liberty. Ordered liberty is knowing what your rights are and when you can express yourself, but also knowing your limits and knowing when not to cross the line. And I think this is especially important in college and with the events that we've seen occurring in the UCs or in other private colleges where the colleges have been giving in to the Trump administration by like, for example, the UC is blocking anti-Semitism through like boycotts. And I think it is important to push back against things we don't believe while also ensuring that we are upholding the laws as well.
And to add on to Jessica, I think that as she exemplified, it's important for us to know our own rights as students. And I think this was really taught to us by one of our coaches, Mr. Dedamore, about the importance of our own advocacy and believing or advocating for what we believe in. And I think as college students, knowing our rights to the extent that We the People has taught us is going to help us like accurately show what we believe in on a sort of like larger scale now in our life.
We're increasingly seeing voter apathy, especially amongst Gen Z and millennial voters. How has your engagement in We the People influenced how you view your power as a citizen or your responsibilities as a citizen or resident in this country?
I think that voter apathy has been largely contributed to disillusionment and how many voters feel like they are voting between a option of bad or worse. And we can see that other countries such as Denmark avoid this pattern and cycle of apathy and disillusionment by mandating voting. And I think that while this is a good option, I think what it taught me learning about these other international solutions, it taught me that in the US, what us as American youth need to do is to engage, regardless of whether our choice is a third party candidate that likely will not actually be elected. It is important to get our voices out there and show these parties that what we want is not out there currently as an option.
Time. Great job. Okay, thank you so much. Before us judges give feedback like we normally would in this context, I wanted to give all the students on here an opportunity to ask a question of our panels. These people just participated in the program, so they're available so you can pick their brain. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question, or you're welcome to also send it in the chat and I can read it out loud. We'll just answer a few questions. Seeing and hearing none, I'm going to give everyone an opportunity to still send messages through the chat if you have questions, but we'll give the feedback now. So I'll start off. Great job, alumni panel. I'm always really impressed. We do this every year, and it's incredible to see how much is retained from when you were actively in the program several months ago to now. Just for everyone's context, they had like only a couple of weeks or even less to put this together. And they didn't know what kinds of questions, just like in the regular competition, we were going to be asking them in the Q&A period. And so, I just really appreciated your testimony. I thought it was really well thought out, had really good evidence sites of different cases like Tinker v. Des Moines, doing specific constitutional sites. That's really important for hitting the evidence bucket. Also, great analysis. In the Q&A, great evidence like on liberty, talking about federalizing the National Guard, and pulling from a lot of your prior experience. You'll find that that stuff just never goes away quite. It'll always kind of be in your head from We the People. And I really appreciated your thoughtfulness. So thank you so much for participating. Let's hear what the other judges want to give feedback on.
Yeah, I'll jump in. There's two things that stuck out to me that I really appreciated, which is one, your willingness and ability to tie things to sort of current or semi-current events or recent events and some really recent events. And often that's what the judges are looking for. They're interested in how does all this knowledge affect me right now? And how does it affect me with regard to immigration enforcement or, current Supreme Court cases or whatever. And so I appreciated that you all thought of that and threw those in both, especially in your Q&A, but also in the testimony a bit. And then the other thing I really appreciated was the enthusiasm. And so, one thing we as CASE love to see is that you're excited about the program, and hopefully everyone who's watching you can see the impact that it's made and the energy that it's brought to you and your future. And so I appreciated that you had a lot of charisma in your in your testimony and present in Q&A presentation. And so thank you so much for taking some time out of your summer to help educate all of us on what We the People is and what all of these students will be doing for the next year.
Thank you. Thank you.
I guess one thing that I really appreciated about your testimony is the way that you tied it to yourselves and the stage of life that you're in right now. And you talked a lot about student rights and, Tinker Des Moines free speech cases that have to do with students. And I think that's something to kind of remember for everyone who's going into the program this year is that we really are here to hear about what you think and your experience and your life. And some of the best testimonies I've ever heard really do talk about how current events are affecting people's day-to-day lives, and then using that as part of the basis to then bring in some sort of constitutional evidence or other scholarly evidence. And so I really appreciated how you focused this testimony a little bit at talking about yourselves and the things that matter to you and activism and things like that. I think that's something really good to keep in mind for everyone going into the program this year, is that as much as it's great to memorize facts and as many facts as you can, you will memorize them. But don't forget that, at the end of the day, people are here to see you and, bring your identity to the program, because it really does make a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just second everything that's been said already. And I'll also just say I'm really excited for you all and your paths after We the People. It's such a skill to be able to get questions on the fly and be able to respond with such poise, bringing in your own evidence and your own experiences that not everyone has the skill for. So thinking about your journeys after We the People, whether it be college or professionally, like you all are really set up for success in such a great way based off of the skills that you've just demonstrated here. So just very excited for you all.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I have not gotten any questions at all. And I know it's a little intimidating, going out on a limb and asking questions in front of a group of people, many of whom you don't know that well yet. But I really encourage you to get comfortable with that. That's a lot of what this program is speaking up, going out on a limb, and learning sort of how to talk on your feet. So if you have any questions, please let us know. Um, I'm still not seeing any, but just while we have all of our alum here, both the alum on our wonderful panel and the other case folks who are on camera right now, if anyone would like to share any advice they have that we haven't talked about yet for the students doing the program this year, we'd love to hear it.
I could start with one thing that I say every year, which is um, try to have fun and try to have fun with your specific unit mates. And you won't get assigned a unit right away. It'll be a month or two into the school year before you sort of know which 2 to 4 other students you'll be working with. But I think the best teams are the ones that can spend time researching together or writing together, but also mix in some joy in whatever they're doing. And everyone kind of finds their different little social gathering type events that they like to do. Some people will go to a coffee shop and like to hang out or, sit in the sun together and use their laptops. My unit, way back in the day, like to play card games together. There was a specific one we played, but we would work really hard for a few hours and on like a Friday night, and then we would go, play cards and eat popcorn, for another hour or two afterward. And so we really bonded together. And part of what that does also is lets you be more comfortable with the personality of who you're working with. And then when you hear them giving an answer, you kind of know where they're going with it and what their speech patterns are like. And so you're able to sort of anticipate how to build off of each other. And it also just frankly makes the process a lot more enjoyable. If you're just little robots writing prompts, that's good education still, but it's not necessarily as fun as getting to know your teammates and classmates. And I will say one other thing is not everyone always gets along, and that's okay too. I've certainly seen perfectly successful units who don't all enjoy that much hanging out with each other. And if you end up in that situation, it's totally fine, totally normal. But I do encourage you to try to find ways to hang out with each other in addition to just working on your testimonies.
Before we hear the advice from others, we have two questions come in. So first, Maya has said that she has a question, so feel free to ask, Maya.
Hi, okay. So I'm Maya. I'm from Amador Valley High School, and I was wondering if in the Q&A, are we allowed to sort of, incorporate like personal experience or like, like you were saying about student rights, like things about people our age to kind of make our answers stand out and make it a little more robust?
I feel like I think when it comes to like actual competition, it definitely shouldn't be like your main evidence. So like say you have three answers in your like overall answer, like it definitely shouldn't be like your leading evidence to be a personal anecdote. But I think the the strength of personal anecdotes is normally like as supporting evidence and seeing how like it's actually applied and like I think it gives you some more like yeah, like
Yeah, it humanizes the conversation that you're having when you're talking about all these detailed legal concepts. It can be a refreshing break, especially for the judges, to hear a personal anecdote that can help liven up the conversation and make the mood better, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that it's good because it can add like some emotional impact, but I would try to limit it to like one personal anecdote per hot seat session.
yeah.
The Q&A.
All right, thank you so much.
Let me jump in and say the short answer is definitely yes. But building on what the alumni panel just said, we're going to talk about types of evidence at one of the future summer sessions, and personal anecdotes are absolutely one of the types of evidence, but generally we say it's the one you want to use the most sparingly. And we find success mostly when people use anecdotes that are very unique, that other people sitting and watching the presentation likely haven't experienced themselves. This often comes up in personal or familial immigration stories. Sometimes comes up in voting rights situations, especially with family members, because I know you're not voting yet, but soon, and a few other contexts as well. But it's really context specific, is what I would say.
And sometimes there's stuff happening at your school that might be relevant. I know my year, there were drug sniffing dogs coming on campus kind of for the first time. And that like brought up a lot of conversations about Fourth Amendment rights of students. And so, you know, I encourage you to think creatively about your experiences, but certainly don't just offer something that isn't really like substantive. And yeah, we'll talk about that later. So the other question we got was, how has your research on We the People changed your mind on any large political issues, or has it more reinforced those opinions?
Sorry,
We-
what question?
We missed the first beginning part.
Has your research on We the People changed your mind on any large political issues, or has it more reinforced those opinions? And anyone can answer, not just the alum panel, but we'd love to hear from you.
I feel like it definitely hasn't. It showed me new perspectives. So I gained like new opinions on things I didn't know about. But for the most part, I feel like personally, it helped me kind of like understand my opinions more. And it made me like actually feel confident in what I believe in instead of just kind of being like, I feel like this is right, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what Tommy said. Like, I feel like going into it, I didn't really have any very solid political opinions. I kind of believed just like, what other people were saying and stuff. But through Weeple, I didn't change my beliefs so much, but I did have more concrete beliefs and I understood why I believed those things.
I think another part of Weeple is like understanding the opposing argument. And I think like there's always benefits and negatives. And like a lot of the times when we consume media, we see it as like, oh, this is only good and this is only beneficial, but there are also like hidden consequences or things like that. So it makes you have a more nuanced understanding and doesn't like just follow something blindly and like you know what's like the consequences, like what else will happen other than like the forefront of it all.
And I think the important part about the nuance is that it also helps like with empathy. I feel like I don't know, I feel like that helped me build my opinion. Having more empathy for other opinions too. Or I guess.
And I think that's right. I think there's a lot of empathy missing in political discourse. I was just going to add that the judges are pretty accepting of all types of opinions. So you'll find that if you have an opinion that's politically leaning one direction, or if you feel very strongly about something, typically speaking, the judges are not going to cast judgment on whatever your personal viewpoints are. They're able to take it all in stride and understand that you might be very right leaning on a certain issue or very left leaning on a certain issue, and the judges will be very accepting of sort of where everyone's coming from when you get into competition.
And I'll just add, this is something Jim had said when talking about the rubric, is, oftentimes we actually need to hear all the sides when you're answering a question. And so, regardless of what you believe as you're doing the research, like having someone either present it as their genuine opinion or just presenting that another side exists is like critical to this program. And so, at least when I participated and what I've seen when volunteering as well, is a lot of people don't necessarily change their mind, but they better understand the other side in a way that they didn't before, which goes to empathy, but also means you can have kind of a better conversation about the issues, really get to the heart of it.
I have to give this quick antidote because it's very relevant to this. The year Sabrina was in the finals in Washington, D.C., one of the questions had to do with the president's ability to issue a drone strike against a U.S. citizen who'd become an enemy combatant in another country. And big, long discussion about that. Almost the whole question ended up covering that. And at the end, in the feedback, one of three judges, and these are very prominent people at the national level, I'll never forget. He said, "Well, I disagree with your take on this issue, but frankly, I'm going to have to rethink my position based on what you said." I was like, "Oh my goodness, that's about as high a compliment as you can get when you've presented enough information to make a judge rethink their position." That won't happen hardly ever, and they may never admit it. But the thing I think you will discover, and it's not at this point right now, when you go to the Q&A sections with all of your homework, you probably know more about the subject area than the judge. Certainly in my case, because I'm not a lawyer, But unless the judge happens to be a specialist in that, you've got more case information, more law, more philosophy backup than they do. So I think one of the things you saw with the alumni presentation is a confidence in what they were saying. And we know this is a fact. These are the things we know, and expressing that in that manner can be very powerful. So you can influence people's thinking. I would expect it would hone your thinking or possibly change your thinking. And that's, I think, the important thing going forward in life. Give yourself the opportunity to continue to rethink your position on something based on new information.
Thank you. And we have another question. During the course of this program, is speech and skills relating to that taught throughout, or is it a side effect of the fact preparation? Are the speech skills something we get to learn?
I think it's like definitely incorporated in feedback. Um, like every time you run your testimony in hot seat, there are usually some like, oh, make sure you're speaking up, make sure you're slowing down, looking at your unit mates and stuff like that. I wouldn't say that's like a core focus. Um, but it is like you definitely do develop it over time, and it definitely helped me a lot with public speaking, and I'm sure with like a lot of other people. So
every school like differs on their practice schedules and whatever, but I think like we all do this so often that it'll like eventually become just like muscle memory and things like that, and you'll get used to it, especially as like the competitive cycle goes on. You get more confident with your citations and things like that, and that really like shows in your presentation. Like once like you're closer to competition, you'll probably be really confident in your citations and you'll be able to like jump in really quickly. So I think it just really comes with time and like just doing it more often and things like that.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, well, thank you again, alumni panel, for your time and efforts. We really appreciate it. It was a wonderful conversation. So now we are going to actually take another 10-minute break, and then we will finish with what is my favorite part of the summer session one, the great debate. You will get to decide what the most powerful branch of the federal government is based off of presentations by the CASE team. And so we will do presentations. We'll give you all an opportunity to ask some questions of us, and then we'll go into breakout rooms and come back and vote. So we will see you all at 11:42. Be back here and we'll get started. Thanks. All right, everyone, we are back. And let's take a look. Okay, so as I said, we're on to my favorite part of summer session one, which is the great debate. What is the most powerful branch of government, of the federal government? Now, this is a question that you all will be answering in the breakout rooms based off of our presentations. So I want you all to listen very carefully to our presentations. Think of some questions that would help you to answer this question that you can ask us after we're done talking. And then you'll be able to discuss in breakout rooms what you think the right answer is. Now, I want to start off by saying the question is, what is the most powerful branch? Not who is the most ethical branch, not what's the best branch, not what's your favorite branch. Okay, it's what's the most powerful branch of government. So I want you all to listen carefully to our different presentations. I will be representing the executive branch today. As I'm president of CASE, it only felt appropriate. Sean will be representing the legislative branch today. And Aaron will be representing the judiciary branch.
As
So
the only oh, as the only non-lawyer on the panel, I thought it would be appropriate.
you're going to crush it. Absolutely. So I'm going to kind of guide us through some key points, and we'll go from there. So the first thing that all the branches of government are going to be talking about is arguments for why they are the most powerful branch, and also what the founders thought of that branch of government and why it would be the most powerful. And being that I'm in charge because I'm the president, I will be starting out in representing the executive branch. So we'll go ahead and get started. Remember, think of questions and feel free to send them to me in the chat for us to go to or to speak up when I open it up to questions. Okay, so why is the executive branch the most powerful branch of government? I think it's pretty obvious in this day and age, but let's go through it. Of all the branches of government, none was created by the framers with the powers vested in just one person. Well, except the executive. In Federalist 70, Alexander Hamilton argued for a strong executive leader directly as a result of how weak the executive was under the Articles of Confederation. He said, taking it for granted, therefore, that all men of sense will agree in the necessity of an energetic executive, it will only remain to inquire, what are the ingredients which constitute this energy? How far can they be combined with those other ingredients which constitute safety in the Republican sense? America had just survived the Revolution, and the Articles of Confederation and Shays' Rebellion showed the folly of not having centralized power to raise taxes or an army. Now, there were a couple of plans that the founders discussed for how to handle the executive. In the Virginia plan, the executive was a single person, chosen by the national legislature with considerable power, who, along with the judiciary, would have some veto power over the legislature. But then there was the New Jersey plan, where the executive was multiple people, elected by Congress, cannot be reelected, can be recalled by Congress when requested by the majority of executives of the states, kind of like how the UK government works. But the framers were more concerned with limiting the scope of the legislative branch that they literally ran out of time to perfect Article 2 of the Constitution pertaining to the executive. The resulting Article 2 of the Constitution, in James Madison's delicate phrase, was not exempt from a degree of the hurrying influence produced by fatigue and impatience. Thomas Jefferson, in Paris during the convention, was more direct. It was, he sputtered, a bad edition of a Polish king. The executive was granted by the founders with many hats that control every aspect of government. He is the commander-in-chief, the person in charge of emergency powers, can issue legislative-like executive orders, can pardon people for crimes, negotiate treaties, veto legislation, and appoint the judiciary. The founders trusted that those powers would go checked by the other branches of government, but that has not bore out in history or today. Congress has crafted broad legislation to allow the president to do many things, including effectively wield war under the War Powers Act without real congressional consent. Although Congress has the power of impeachment, those efforts have failed, even in light of a potential coup led by the president. And the judiciary is willing to grant president broad powers and discretion, especially in the context of foreign policy and immigration. We have seen the judiciary willing to give the president leave to do virtually anything by granting him criminal immunity from undefined official acts, such as what they said in Trump v. United States. And in the past 6 months, President Trump in his second term has already issued over 170 executive orders, wielding unprecedented power without a single check by Congress or the judiciary. These include unilaterally extending deadlines to ban TikTok, despite it being set explicitly by a law issued by Congress with bipartisan support, and the Supreme Court had said that it was constitutional. He also coerced large law firms into providing millions of dollars worth of free legal services for the administration and issuing executive orders that threaten the ability for foreign firms to maintain clients if they do not comply. He decimated the federal workforce, completely remaking it in his image. He got rid of the USAID, which was a major executive agency. He issued sweeping tariffs on almost every major country. And he empowered all federal agents, including ICE and the FBI, to conduct systematic raids to deport individuals and enlisted the National Guard to support that effort. As Hamilton said, Energy in the executive is a leading character in the definition of good government. With only a few limits, whatever the president wants, the executive branch delivers. And the actual text of Article 2 is somewhat ambiguous, which is a flaw that has been exploited by every president since nearly the beginning of the nation. And that's why, as Hamilton desired, the executive is the most powerful branch of government today. Sean, why don't you take it away and tell me why I'm wrong and that the legislature is the
Well,
most.
you definitely are wrong, especially when you said just now that there haven't been any checks on all of those powers. But I will get to that in due time. Let me start by saying that our country was initially founded on this Articles of Confederation idea that Sabrina also mentioned, and was somewhat viewed as a failure, or definitely viewed as a failure, at least at the time, for a couple of reasons. One, it lacked a taxing authority at the federal level. There wasn't sufficient power over interstate commerce, which was very important to the framers. There was a decentralized power, and the framers felt we needed a more centralized power. In this case, though, they felt centralized power in the legislative branch. And there was a general lack of legislative supremacy over, especially over the states and the state governments. The framers were most familiar with legislative bodies, for example, the Virginia House of Burgesses, and other, similar legislative state bodies, as well as the congresses that they had in Philadelphia during the Revolution and thereafter. So the framers certainly viewed the legislative branch as the main source of power for the federal government as well. And that's why Article 1 is the longest section in the Constitution. It encompasses more than half of the total words in the document. And most of these words in Article 1 are granting powers to Congress. Sometimes people say, well, there's restrictions on Congress in Article 1, and that's true, but there are also very specifically enumerated powers that only apply to Congress, and there are numerous examples of that in Article 1 of the US Constitution, including powers over the other branches and over the states. For example, the Supremacy Clause is also thrown in Article 6, Clause 2, that goes on to say that it's the supreme law of the land, and all of the legislative ruling, or the legislative laws and decisions that are made at the legislative level will be the supreme law of the land, applicable to not just the federal government, but the state governments and all citizens. Article 1 includes certain things like the Appropriations Clause, which is Section 9, Clause 7, the Taxing and Spending Clause, Section 8, Clause 1, and it also gives numerous war powers to Congress, including to declare war, to raise and support armies, that's more of a financial power, to provide and maintain a navy, to make rules regarding government regulation of the land and naval forces, et cetera, et cetera. And so throughout Article 1, you see all of these powers provided to Congress. In particular, the two most, I guess, powerful clauses given to Congress are the Necessary and Proper Clause and the Commerce Clause, both of which have been used to dramatically expand power at the legislative level throughout our almost 250-year history. Um, and they also have the spending power, the power of the purse, as we call it, which is to say they can dramatically impact the other two branches of government through spending powers. And they can expand or restrict the amount of funding given to different executive agencies. They can expand or restrict the funding and powers given to judicial branches outside of the 9 Supreme Court justices. And Congress controls all of that. They have the Article 1, Section 8, Clause 9 that allows them to create the tribunals that are inferior to the Supreme Court. So all of these court systems are created or eliminated by Congress through that clause and through the Necessary and Proper Clause, which we sometimes call the Elastic Clause. And Madison in particular, James Madison in Federalist 51, said in a Republican government, the legislative authority necessarily predominates. So the Federalists were in favor of it, and the Anti-Federalists were sort of scared of the power given to the legislative branch at that time. In Brutus I, probably Robert Yates wrote that he was very concerned about the Necessary and Proper Clause combined with the Supremacy Clause and how that might usurp state power and trample on the local and state rights. He talked about the fear of eliminating any sovereignty or autonomy left to the states. Hamilton in Federalist 33 talked a lot about how it's simply a truism that federal law must predominate. And through the Necessary Proper Clause and Supremacy Clause, it must be the case that the legislative branch of our government is making the laws of our land and dominating over the other bodies of government, both at the state and federal level. And he went into great detail about that during in Federalist 33 and Federalist 44. Um, the Commerce Clause as well has been used in a number of ways. It grants the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations, among all of the different states, and also with Native American tribes. And starting in especially the 1940s with Wickard versus Filborn through the present, it's really opened the floodgates for Congress to pass laws that regulate all kinds of parts of our economy. And we see it referenced throughout Supreme Court decisions. For example, Justice Roberts talked about the power of Congress in the Commerce Clause in the National Federation of Independent Businesses versus Sebelius case that came out in I think the last Obama administration. Um, Sabrina talked a lot about the unchecked power of the executive, and that's not really the case. So she mentioned tariffs and how there's sort of these broad sweeping tariffs, and that's what the headlines like to tell you. But Congress has definitely come out and said, that no, that's not what the Constitution says. The Constitution says that tariffs can only be instituted by the executive branch during times of emergency. It's an emergency power. Otherwise, the tariffs have to go through Congress. And it appears that the courts are agreeing with that interpretation of the law. Of course, the executive branch is trying to find ways around that and making flashy headlines. But ultimately, when these things are challenged in court, often Congress comes out ahead, and the court will find that no, the president did not have that power. And we're seeing the same thing with some of the other executive orders. So just this week, some of the ICE enforcement powers were blocked in district courts throughout the country. And similarly, we just saw a new ruling basically saying that the way that ISIS is not providing warrants and all of that kind of stuff is potentially unconstitutional and being blocked by the courts, as well as the Supreme Court decision on birthright citizenship, again, sort of being blocked because it didn't decide on the merits. It was a procedural decision. And so we've seen a new ruling just this week, basically saying that the executive orders regarding birthright citizenship are likely to be blocked as unconstitutional, although it's going to have to go up through the court system. So I teed that up a little bit for Aaron there, but I brought that up mostly to say that this idea that the executive branch is running amok and being totally unchecked is false. Both Congress and the judiciary are certainly acting as checks at times on these executive orders. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sean, for that excellent introduction to why the court is the most powerful branch. We'll get a little bit later as to how the court has so many checks on both of the other two branches. But I do want to start with talking about the founders. And as both Sabrina and Sean have mentioned, the Article 1 and Article 2 enumerate many powers for both the legislative and executive branches. And that's not really true for the judicial. And when you look at Article 3, it's really short and it's very vague. And what that should be interpreted as is not that it is not powerful, but rather that it is incredibly powerful. Because as Sean mentioned, there is the Commerce Clause, there is all of these clauses that dictate the powers of Congress. There are similar ones for the executive. And for the judicial branch, there just isn't that. There's specific language that says the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court. And so judicial power is the most vague phrase that you could possibly use. And the court, over the last 200 years, has taken that to mean pretty much anything that they want it to mean. There's a quote from Aristotle that nature abhors a vacuum. And we can see this in constitutional law, that given the vacuum of power left for the Supreme Court, they have taken that and ran with it. And so the judges of the Supreme Court are also one of the least checked balances of the three branches, primarily being in their tenure structure. Presidents have a 4-year plan or a 4-year tenure, maybe an 8-year tenure. Representatives have a 2-year tenure, which can be extended. Justices are elected for life, and as we've seen, they stick around for decades. This allows them independence from the fleeting whims of popular opinion, but it also grants them the ability to do what they think is in the best interest of law and of the Constitution. Further, impeachment does exist for the judicial branch as well, but it's been enacted even less than it has for the executive branch. There have been, I think, 3 presidents who have been impeached. I'm counting right. There's been one justice who has been impeached, and he was also acquitted. So acquittal has never happened for the judicial branch as well.
You mean a finding of guilt has never happened?
A finding of guilt, yes, acquittal has happened every time. That's correct.
Yes.
Yeah. As far as the founders go, Hamilton's been brought up a few times. And it's important to concede here that Hamilton did note in Fed 78 that Hamilton said the judiciary is beyond comparison the weakest of the 3 departments of power, yet serves as an intermediate body between the people and the legislature. The thing is, Hamilton was wrong here. This was written in 1788, and it's important as you go through this program to know that the founders were neither omniscient, omnipotent, or deities. They didn't know what was going to happen in the future. And so Hamilton did write this, and he did believe it to some extent. But he also wrote that the interpretation of the laws is the proper and peculiar province of the court. And it is that interpretation of the laws that unexpectedly, to some of these founders writing in 1788, became the reason why the court is the most powerful branch. And that came in 1803 with Marbury v. Madison. As some of you will know, or you will soon to know very well, this was from the Marshall Court, and it allowed for the practice of the court to overrule the other branches and to interpret the Constitution. This was discussed at the Constitutional Convention. It did exist in the conscience of the founders, and yet when it was actualized in the Supreme Court case, the Supreme Court has grown the power that it has used ever since then to become the most powerful branch. We'll get into that in a little bit.
All right, interesting. I have a lot to say, but I'm going to hold back for now. And let's move on to have each of the panelists explain why their branch has the best ability to protect individual rights. So why don't we start with the legislative branch?
And for this part and the next part, I'm going to put a question in chat, which I just did, that I'd like you all to feel free to chime in on, which is, what do you believe are some of the most important federal laws, and I don't mean amendments to the U.S. Constitution, court cases, or executive actions that have impacted our individual rights over our history? And feel free to throw anything in the chat that you think was a most important or one of the most important of those 3 categories, and we can weave them into our presentation here as we go. Because I always love to hear from you and hope that you're paying attention still. But with regard to individual rights, Congress certainly is at the forefront of creating the laws that protect these kinds of fundamental rights or grant new individual rights. And I want to start by highlighting the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Of course, we have the Bill of Rights. It's very important. But the 14th Amendment was particularly important because it expanded those rights to the states through incorporation later on, but also essentially created new rights in the Constitution that have been dramatically built on since the 1860s. And I'm talking about equal protection and due process, essentially. And so John Bingham wrote that in large part, and Congress really drafted and moved forward with the 14th Amendment. This is a congressional action, a legislative action that has been probably the #1 expander of individual rights throughout our history as a nation. Of course, along with the other 2 Reconstruction amendments to the Constitution passed at the same time. One of the biggest legislative actions that came about because of the 14th Amendment was the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which includes, sometimes you'll hear something like Title VII or Title IX. There's a number of titles, but those are some of the ones you might hear in the news frequently. And these titles and sections within the Civil Rights Act have greatly empowered all of the political actors to protect the individual rights of people in this country. So, for example, based on the Civil Rights Act, we saw a fairly recent ruling called Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, where the court said the language of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits sex discrimination and applied that based on sexual orientation and gender identity and not just sex at birth or gender. And so you're seeing that when the court sees what Congress has done, it's affirming that these laws passed by Congress create these individual rights and protect these individual rights and people throughout the country. And there's so many examples of this that flow out of the 14th Amendment. Another example is the Voting Rights Act, which is, passed around the same time as the Civil Rights Act in the 60s. And so we also see, in addition to sort of things flowing directly out of amendments to the Constitution, things that are inherent to Congress through the powers that I mentioned in the first section, the Necessary and Proper Clause, the Commerce Clause, etc. One key example might be the Environmental Protection Act. So you see that Congress has these unique power and authority to pass laws that protect our air quality, our water quality, our our air traffic safety, waterway navigation, all of these things that Congress can pass that create rules and regulations that keep us all safe and then also protect our individual right to breathe free air or breathe clean air or drink clean water, for example. And then we can see things like the Voting Rights Act that I mentioned, the Lilly Ledbetter Act of 2009 is another one that comes to mind. And there's, a lot of these then have litigation that surround them, and the court often then affirms that these things are constitutional. We'll also see that the legislative will sometimes override the executive branch when they exceed their authority in trying to undo individual rights. And so there's going to be a lot of that kind of fighting, I think, in the next 2 to 4 years. I think one thing you're hearing a lot about is what might happen in the midterm elections. And so right now, Congress is fairly much along for the ride with what the current executive administration is doing, but there's a lot of focus on what could happen if the Constitution of Congress changes in a year and a half or 2 years, and all of a sudden you have a hostile Congress, and the assumption is all these sort of executive actions that are happening will come to a screeching halt because Congress is going to either pass laws that prohibit those kinds of executive orders or different things, or they're going to refuse to pass laws like the one we just saw passed, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or One Big Beautiful, I think, yeah, One Big Beautiful Bill Act, I think is what it's called. But anyway, that act was passed by Congress, not by the executive branch, first of all. But secondly, you won't see that kind of support for the executive if the Democrats essentially take control of one or both houses of Congress in the next midterm election. And then when they do have that kind of countervailing authority to the president, you see things like Congress taking action to uphold the Obama era um, DACA rules, the DACA rules that the first Trump administration was hostile to, and so Congress can then work to empower individual rights, even if the executive branch is hostile to those rights or trying to undo those rights from prior administrations. I also will note just in passing that immigration is a huge focus point right now when it comes to individual rights throughout our country, for I think good reason. And a lot of the rules that surround immigration are built out of the Naturalization Act, which was passed by Congress. And so Congress created and can change the rules that govern immigration in this country, or immigration enforcement as well. And another example of that, I mentioned the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. That is a congressional act that was debated hotly and passed through Congress just a few weeks ago. And uh, one of the things it did is it greatly expanded the funding for immigration enforcement. So that's the power of the purse being wielded by Congress to further, whatever agenda they're furthering. And one might argue that they're doing that for the common good or to promote individual rights. Others might argue that they're restricting the individual rights with that action, but either way, Congress is the one with the power to pass those laws and advance or restrict individual rights. And with that, I think I turn it back to Sabrina. Or is Aaron going again?
I'm going. Yeah. Oh wait, no. Aaron's going. Sorry. Go ahead, Aaron.
Okay, great. Well, I'll start in the same place that Sean did, I think, which is with the 14th Amendment, which totally rebalanced the powers of the federal government and how the federal government interacts with the state government. And one of the most important clauses of the 14th Amendment is the Equal Protection Clause, right? Nor shall any state deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. And these words were written by Congress, admittedly, but they didn't mean anything until the court implemented them case after case, year after year, for hundreds of years. And so I'd like to go through a little bit of a quick summary of some of these cases that the court has gone through to incorporate the Equal Protection Clause and incorporate the amendments of the federal government to the state level. And so when we think about, first, let's just start with the chat where Maya and Shunak and Ryan and Gia have all listed some great Supreme Court cases that have protected individual rights. And we'll get to those, many of them, in this discussion. But when we think about the incorporation of the amendments to the states, we can think about Gitlow v. New York, which incorporated First Amendment speech rights. We can think about Neer v. Minnesota, which incorporated freedoms of the press. We can think about Mapp v. Ohio, which incorporated Fourth Amendment search protections. We can think about Gideon v. Wainwright, which incorporated Sixth Amendment counsel rights. We can think about McDonald v. Chicago, which incorporated Second Amendment rights. And so many of these amendments, I think almost all of them by now, except for one clause of one amendment, I don't remember which one, have been incorporated to the states. And that has been done by the Supreme Court. And so when you think about the laws that affect you day-to-day life, often it's not actually federal laws that are passed by the Congress, it's the state laws. And the incorporation of those rights on the laws that affect you on day-to-day life come from the Supreme Court. But let's think a little bit more about what American history events have been caused by. And when you think about it, often you will find out that the court was responsible for them. We can start with the Civil War, which was started by the Supreme Court with the Dred Scott v. Sanford decision, which ruled that African Americans are not citizens and therefore led to the events that caused the Civil War by enforcing the practice of slavery, which had to be resolved through the Civil War. We can think about the Bill of Rights application, as we mentioned earlier, which is through Gitlow v. New York, incorporated freedom of speech and the press. When we think about executive war powers, as Sabrina mentioned earlier, did Congress limit the war powers? No. The Supreme Court limited that in Youngstown Sheet and 2 v. Sawyer. When we think about civil rights cases, did Congress desegregate education? No. The Supreme Court did with Brown v. Board of Education. Did the executive allow for interracial marriage laws? That was also the Supreme Court in Loving v. Virginia. When we think about same-sex marriage laws, that was the Supreme Court in Obergefell v. Hodges. Did Congress establish a right to privacy? That was the Supreme Court in Griswold v. Connecticut. And then we can also think about in the modern day how rights and restrictions have been granted and taken away by the Supreme Court. As Sean mentioned earlier, Bostock v. Clayton County protected LGBTQ rights, and Obergefell v. Hodges protected same-sex marriage. But this doesn't necessarily impact to things that we think are normatively good, or at least I think are normatively good. We can see that in Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court found that the Constitution gives the right to bodily autonomy. And then we found that in Dobbs v. Jackson, the Supreme Court undecided that there was a right to bodily autonomy. And so the ability to find a right, an individual right, and then to unfind it a few years later has to speak to the ability to have power. Finally, I just like to bring up some of the actions that the executive actions that President Trump has taken recently that have gone above and beyond the powers granted the Constitution. But these powers were not just taken by President Trump. They were granted in Trump v. United States, which was decided by the Supreme Court. With that, I'll pass it over to Sabrina.
And Aaron, before we turn to Sabrina, I'll just say you're getting a lot of support in the chat here. I asked the question, what are some of the most important court decisions or federal laws or executive actions? And the majority of the answers are really good court cases. So we've got Dobbs versus Jackson. Oh, actually, that was your example, Aaron. But also we had Gideon versus Wainwright that guarantees the right to legal counsel, Obergefell versus Hodges leading to marriage equality, United States versus Chatry set important precedent on geofence warrants. Miranda is a really great case regarding the Fifth Amendment, Miranda rights, Reed versus Reed regarding gender equality under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment that we all just mentioned. So you can see all of you already know a lot of these examples of events at our federal government level that protect individual rights.
The people have spoken.
All right, don't get ahead of yourselves. So as the other panelists have suggested, sure, there are other ways in which the president's power is limited and individual rights is furthered in that way. But the president has the most direct impact on people's lives on a day-to-day through implementing executive orders and from running the executive agencies. Court cases don't come to the Supreme Court unless they are brought there. And so oftentimes what the executive is doing from the start is what's going to be impacting individual rights until someone says something otherwise. There are many reasons why the Supreme Court itself will limit its ability to rule on an issue related to individual rights, including the political questions doctrine, which says that it will let the executive kind of do whatever it wants in in certain cases that involve key political questions. So just keeping that in mind, that what the president is doing, even if it's later overturned by the Supreme Court, oftentimes what the president's actions as to individual rights, they'll just continue doing it until someone stops him otherwise. And so that is a key way that it's impacting individual rights. Um, and for instance, there was a recent Supreme Court decision about birthright citizenship that actually it wasn't talking about the merits of the case, but it was limiting the power of courts to be able to stop the executive from issuing at a nationwide level applying these policies. So, the Supreme Court and Congress are actually really limited in their ability to reach to what the president is doing. But turning to the actual merits, the president itself is an office that is designed to help protect individual rights in some way. President Obama once said, "As president, I have no greater responsibility than protecting the American people." The president takes an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, which includes the individual rights enumerated in that document. In the 1960s and 70s, for example, US presidents showed their commitment to international human rights by the executive signing, though not by the legislative ratifying, several major human rights treaties, including the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. In fact, during the Carter administration, respect for human rights even played a role in determining foreign policy. One of the powers the president has used to protect individual rights is the executive order. For example, here are some executive orders on human rights throughout US history. President Obama provided workplace protections for LGBT workers in Executive Order 13672. Executive Order 13107 by President Clinton implemented human rights treaties. Lincoln, of course, issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. President Truman desegregated the military in Executive Order 9981. In 1957, Eisenhower's Executive Order 10730 federalized the National Guard to desegregate schools in Little Rock, Arkansas. And in 1961, Kennedy established the President's Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity in Executive Order 10925. Additionally, presidents have exercised deferred action or a choice not to use enforcement powers to further individual rights, like President Obama's easing enforcement of federal marijuana laws, or the deferred action for childhood arrivals, i.e., the DACA policy. The power to determine when and how laws are applied make the president singularly powerful in protecting and furthering individual rights. Presidents also informally control the national agenda, as we've seen from what President Trump is doing, but has also been in the past. The president can use the bully pulpit and also informal other relationships with Congress and sometimes the judiciary to influence what bills are made and what they look like. And part of that informal impact is, as we've seen through several executive orders, where the president is attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And that kind of impacts the scope of individual rights. Finally, the president has the power to extend his presidency long beyond the 4 or 8 year runs by picking Supreme Court justices to shape the individual rights landscape as we know it. For instance, Aaron mentioned the flip of Roe v. Wade and Dobbs v. Jackson with the right to an abortion. Why did that happen? It wasn't an inherent power related to how the judiciary works, but it was the president being able to control who was being appointed to the Supreme Court and having them control the agenda. So that is a key part of the power and functionally an extension. We also have other instances of these policies being controlled by the president, including getting rid of affirmative action in Students for Fair Admissions v. President and Fellows of Harvard College, and Eighth Amendment rights for homeless individuals, such as City of Grants Pass versus Johnson. So, although it is the judicial branch, presidents have the power to shape the judicial branch in their image, and nothing is more powerful than that. And we've really seen that borne out, especially in the last 6 months. So, no matter what your views are on what individual rights should look like, it is indisputable that the president has the power to impact them drastically, for good or for bad.
He started to worry me there about this expanding his term beyond 4 or 8 years. I was like, Sabrina, where are you going with that?
All right. So the last topic we're going to do before we open up to questions is each of us are going to talk about the ability for our branch to promote the common good. So we're going to start with Aaron. And as you'll see in the chat, Sean has posted a new question about examples for promoting the common good. So please share your answers to that question in the chat, and we'll talk about them.
Yeah, thank you, Sabrina. And so when talking about the common good, I'm going to make the argument today that the judicial branch, specifically the Supreme Court, decides what the common good is for the American people. Because what is the ruling principle of the judicial branch, if not the rule of law? That no person, whether they be a president or a legislator or a judge, is above the law, that the law is supreme. And who decides what the law means? The judicial branch. And so when we think about the common good and we think about how you balance between the needs of the powerful and the powerless, the rich and the poor, how we balance between social groups, we find that many times it is the Supreme Court who is doing this. So when we think about economic justice, for example, right? Sean mentioned earlier the Commerce Clause in the Constitution, which was used to great power, but didn't really gain incredible power until Heart of Atlanta Motel of the United States, in which case civil rights were able to be implemented by the federal government through the Commerce Clause, because the Supreme Court decided that pretty much anything is a commerce power, and therefore the Supreme Court or the Congress could do what they needed to do. And so while Congress could solve these problems, they only had that power because the Supreme Court granted it to them. To get a little more into the weeds of things, I want to think a little bit more about what a judge actually does and how people think about how judges make their decisions. And so there's kind of 2 or 3 models of judging, right? There's a formal model, which is to say that every legal question has a correct answer that can be found by hitting the books and reading the case law and doing the work. And through that work, you will find the correct answer in any decision. And if you cannot find an answer or there's a disagreement, then someone is making a mistake or they are acting in bad faith. But when we think about the history of Supreme Court decisions, we think maybe that that's not true. And the skeptical view proposes that the law is so malleable that legal arguments can be produced to justify pretty much any resolution of a contested case, and that plausible legal arguments can be found, and if not, there is no overrule the judges, and they can make up whatever they want. And there's no better example than the one that I brought up before, which is how Roe v. Wade discovered the right to having an abortion and bodily autonomy, and then that same right was undiscovered by Dobbs v. Jackson. And when we think about the common good, this is the Supreme Court deciding what is in the common good of the nation, whether that is at first for women to have the right to an abortion, and then for women to not have that right, and to protect the common good of unborn fetuses in some people's view. And so when we think about the common good, what we need to think about is who is defining the common good. And it's not the laws that are defining the common good, because they're often technical and specific. And it's not executive actions that are defining the common good, but it is the Supreme Court and the decisions that it makes, including all of the ones we've discussed earlier, that decide what is the common good for the American people. I think I will pass it off to Sabrina, I believe.
What's a better indication of what the common good is than the whole country voting for a single person to carry out their interest. That is fundamentally what the president does, and the president executes that in all of his work. As Theodore Roosevelt stated in his autobiography, I decline to adopt the view that what was imperatively necessary for the nation could not be done by the president unless he could find some specific authorization to do it. My belief was that it was not only his right, but his duty to do anything that needs of the nation demanded, unless such action was forbidden by the Constitution or by the laws. In other words, I acted for the public welfare. I acted for common well-being of all our people whenever and in whatever manner was necessary, unless prevented by direct constitutional or legislative prohibition. That is an articulation that also is supported by this idea of the unitary executive that the Trump administration abides by and is using that, and many other presidents have used it similarly to carry out the powers for what they perceive as the common good. The president's role in enacting to respond to the COVID pandemic is an example of this. The president acted quickly to promote the development of vaccines and resources, and the president is best suited to act in times of emergency. And that's why it's really critical, particularly in those situations, that the common good is protected by the executive branch. Roosevelt applied his expansive view of presidential power on numerous occasions, but most notably was his intervention in a national coal strike to broker an agreement between management and labor. And that resulted in binding arbitration. Although neither the Constitution or federal law expressly authorized the president in this kind of intervention, Roosevelt took action for the common good. Similarly, President Ronald Reagan ordered striking air traffic controllers to return to work after their negotiations with the federal government to raise their pay and shorten their work week proved fruitless. When they refused, he ordered them fired. In addition to direct action, the ability to pass regulations is also a power of the executive branch, and regulations are tantamount to legislation in many respects that promote the common good. Congress knows that it cannot legislate minutia, and hence when it writes legislation, it leaves large gaps and ambiguities to be filled in by the executive agencies on anything from the environment, agriculture, housing, employment, commerce, labor, justice, food, drug, and Food Drug Agency, CIA, FBI, immigration. The president has proven more than happy to fill in those details, and this is why the executive is the most powerful branch in promoting the common good. Sean, bring us home.
All right. Well, I think this is where the legislative branch really shines. The legislative branch, I think, is at the forefront of promoting the common good and creating infrastructure for our common good in this country. And I'll note in this round in the chat, there's predominantly legislative examples given by all of you. So Civil Rights Act 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965, labor laws, Medicaid and Medicare and Medicaid creation, Social Security Act, Civil Rights Act. And then there are two other examples I'll throw out there that I see. So I see somebody mentioned executive action regarding DACA in 2012 and Brown versus Board of Education, ruling that the segregation on the basis of race is unconstitutional. So those are the examples given in chat. Thank you so much for all of your participation so far. But let me just say that Article 1, Section 8 begins that Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. If that doesn't sound like a branch of government created to form the common to uphold the common good, I don't know what does. But that is exactly what Congress does. They pass lots of laws that really do promote the common good and use the power of the purse to keep our government going, to keep our infrastructure running, to regulate safety measures and traffic, air traffic and car traffic, shipping traffic, both logistically with trucking and also on the seas and our waterways. And so all of these things are powers that Congress wields through the power of the purse to really keep our whole country going. Um, or even to use a negative example, to bail out the banks in 2008, 2009, following the financial meltdown in the housing sector. And they really have this power in large part because of the 16th Amendment passed in 1913, which created the income tax and really has created a much bigger pool of money for Congress to wield in creating agencies, creating laws, and all of these things that keep our whole country running. And so congressional power has really expanded over the last 100 plus years to meet all the expectations we have with a modern society. So we're not just on riding horses, back and forth from Boston to Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. to South Carolina anymore. Now, we're a much bigger country with all kinds of infrastructure that exists, and congressional power has expanded to reflect that. And additionally, our population has really increased a lot over time, and congressional power over how it regulates all of us in our day-to-day lives has also expanded. So let's give some examples. Um, the Federal Highway Act of 1956 under the Eisenhower administration created a whole network of highways throughout our country. I mean, really modern society is based on this highway system we have throughout, especially California, but all the other states as well, that allows us to get from place to place. And that is, again, Congress using its power of the person, the necessary and proper clause, and the Commerce Clause to create those infrastructures for us to use for the common good. It then also creates safety laws. So it created the Department of Transportation and passed the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration Act to create rules that govern how these infrastructures are used and how our shipping is used throughout the country to get food where it needs to go, to make sure drivers are safe, they're getting their meal and rest breaks, whatever it needs to be. They also passed the powers that give police powers to the FBI or whomever. Education programs, We the People at one time was funded by the federal government. It is not currently. And so, they'll pass these education programs. But also, education at a K through 12 level throughout the country as well is largely impacted by the laws passed in Congress. I've mentioned aviation and navigable waterways already. They'll pass laws regarding the military. They'll pass laws regarding white collar crime and predatory lending, which was maybe a more interesting topic 20 years ago, but with the Dodd-Frank Act. But now I think that, we're seeing a lot of immigration laws or guidance coming out of the reconciliation process in Congress about how federal money can be used regarding immigration. So that's kind of the current hot button topic, I would say. And they can create and modify these powers and how the agencies at the executive level are allowed to use these powers and these dollars whenever they want, essentially. And we see that again through this reconciliation process and the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was just passed last week. So some other examples of promoting the health and safety, I'll just rattle these off. OSHA, if you've heard of that, regarding health and safety in the workplace. The FLSA governs our wage and hour laws in this country. The National Labor Relations Act, the NLRA, governs unionization throughout this country. We've mentioned the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Acts from the 1960s. A more recent example is the CARES Act, passed under the Biden administration. One that I thought was really interesting, passed, and I guess it was during the first Trump administration, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act was interesting to me because it was the first federal law that created a sick time rule, and it was a temporary one. It was under COVID, but a sick time law that impacted everyone at the federal level, so all states, as opposed to state by state sick time laws. I mentioned infrastructure bills. If we go back to something fairly impactful from 20 years ago, we had the Patriot Act passed in response to the September 11th attacks and the war on terror. Again, these are all things that come out of Congress that are designed to protect our country, promote the common good. We're seeing the executive dramatically bungling some of these things and how they're using their funds. For example, with the flooding in Texas last week, that started on the 4th of July. Congress has enacted FEMA, right, to create all kinds of funds to be used to protect the health and safety of this country. Whether, the executive screws that up, I can't, hold them responsible necessarily, but Congress could. Congress can hold hearings, and censure executive agencies for not following the laws that they passed or not using the funds that are allocated to them. And so all of this then also comes through the supremacy clause and these legislative actions being the law of the land, which also allows them to have power over the state governments. So essentially, Congress can occupy the field, if you will, on a lot of these areas of the law to the exclusion of the other branches of government and to the exclusion of state governments. One key example often cited for that is environmental policy, or the dormant commerce clause is sometimes cited if you've ever heard of that. And the Congress also has the wartime powers, which, there's a lot of tension there about who has power and the use of force on foreign entities. But Congress passes things like the AUMF that give certain war powers to the president in Iraq or Afghanistan. Um, Things of that nature. So let me skip ahead a little bit here. I wanted to highlight one other key issue that was mentioned earlier by my colleagues, which is how Supreme Court justices, or really any judges, are appointed. And Sabrina talked a lot about how the president can further their agenda once they're out of office. But I would say that's a power that Congress has really stolen since the second Obama administration, when we saw Judge Garland's seat essentially uh, they filibustered it essentially so that he couldn't be voted in as a new Supreme Court justice, and filled that seat with a different justice under the next administration. And you saw during the Obama administration also, the Senate was really preventing a lot of judicial seats from being filled until it could fill them with judges that Congress wanted to have in those seats. And so, yes, it depends on who the president is, and they have to nominate certain people, but Congress can control when that happens, and they can prevent the president from putting people into the judiciary branch as they see fit. So I really see this modernly as almost a Senate power that exists rather than a presidential power. And with that, I will turn it over to whoever goes next.
All right. I think we hit all the points, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm last.
No, that's okay. So we have a couple of minutes to open up to hear all of your questions for us to help us uh, prove to you what the most powerful branch is. So please send questions. You can send it in the main chat or directly to me, and we'll answer it, and then we'll head on to the breakout rooms.
Or Sabrina, are you okay with them just turning on their mics and asking?
Yes, you're welcome to do that too. In fact, I'd prefer that. All right, I got one. I've been challenged. Are you sure Trump's executive orders have gone unchecked?
Are you sure? Good, Sabrina.
Yes. So, of course, I don't think every single thing that he's done has gone unchecked. However, the majority of things that he has done has either flown under the radar, like he's been able to go forward with that, or it has been possibly stopped by district court or even circuit court decisions. But this goes to a really recent Supreme Court decision, CASA, I think it's CASA v. Trump, that talks about the scope of what those lower level courts can even do to stop presidential action, even if they find it unconstitutional. And it's what's called like a scope of an injunction. And the injunction is just a fancy term for stopping the presidential power. And it used to be the case that there'd be certain situations in which district courts and circuit courts could issue nationwide injunctions to stop it from applying to anyone. But now with the president or with the Supreme Court weighing in on this issue, that possibility isn't as broad anymore, and the prospect of nationwide injunctions are basically non-existent now, which means the president can keep doing what he's doing until the Supreme Court essentially tells him to stop. And as you'll go through this program, you'll kind of learn the exact nuances, but at a high level, most of what the Trump administration has done in the first 6 months of the presidency has basically been allowed to proceed in one way or the other, whether with the Supreme Court's blessing or not. And another example of the president kind of bulldozing past court system is a court told the Trump administration to turn around a plane of immigrants who were being deported to El Salvador, and the Trump administration just didn't comply. And that's one of the possibly scary things about the executive branch is that although the Supreme Court and other courts can tell the president what to do or not to do, there is always a risk and potentially a constitutional crisis afoot if the president says no. What are you going to do about it? The Supreme Court doesn't have an army. So those are all things to keep in mind, but I also think that goes to why the executive branch is fundamentally the most powerful branch, even if on paper it may be checked in other areas.
I would just say that's an interesting example you picked with the nationwide injunction because 2 days ago, despite that Supreme Court ruling, a nationwide injunction was enacted by a U.S. District Court, I believe, out of San Diego in the Barbara versus Donald J. Trump case. And so the judges are finding ways around that Supreme Court decision. That Supreme Court decision did not decide on the merits the constitutionality of the executive order of birth regarding birthright citizenship. So it's an interesting time we're living in with these fights between the executive and judicial branch and who can wield what such, which powers. But I would say that these things are getting checked. They're just not getting checked maybe at the speed we would like, if you're opposed to some of these actions or if you think they're unconstitutional. And then I would also say, maybe to my own detriment in this argument today, that Congress is not doing a lot to check the president right now. And that's in large part because it's controlled by individuals who support the presidential actions or feel that they have to support the president for political reasons. And so a lot of these things that might be checked by Congress or result in hearings or impeachment, like we saw in the first Trump administration, are not happening in the congressional level right now. There's a couple other questions in the comments there, Sabrina.
Yep, we got, did SCOTUS place an injunction on Biden's student loan forgiveness? It's been a while since I read that opinion, but I think that is the case that the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional and functionally. I don't know if the mechanism was an injunction at the time. There's like a legal distinction there that you'll learn later on. But yeah, the Supreme Court from time to time will limit president's power. I don't think that the president it has unlimited power under the Constitution. I just think it's the most powerful branch because it's able to implement all kinds of things, try things out, and it has to wait till the Supreme Court goes through the motion. A case is brought to a district court, it's appealed to the circuit court, and then the Supreme Court chooses whether or not to take it. And it's a live action. It's not, there's so many boxes that need to be checked before the judiciary or even really Congress can take any action. The president is designed to be an energetic branch, and so that's why the president has been able to do so much in 6 months. And whether or not another branch checks it down the road, right now, like he is just President Trump is doing the most powerful things across the board, across industries.
And just to give a black and white answer, it's yes, the Supreme Court did decide. I think the case is Biden versus Nebraska. But it's not an injunction. So to Sabrina's point, like the legal process is very complicated. We will love to teach you about it in this program. But they actually struck it down, meaning they found it to be unconstitutional, and therefore it's no longer the loan forgiveness executive order is no longer in effect. So that's what happened at that Supreme Court decision.
Looks like we have another question. Do you think the current executive branch is so powerful because the legislative and judicial branch are stacked in its favor? I will let someone else answer this first, and then I can answer.
Yeah, I mean, that's a political party question in large part, and we're going to talk about Federalist 10, in this program and other things, but it's, modernly, we have people banding together in these political parties in ways that allow them to control government across the branches. And we're really seeing the effects of that right now. And we have for decades, but especially right now, we're seeing it. And so when you say stacked, I think that's what you mean, that it's stacked with people who support the agenda of the current executive administration. And, I use the example of the courts and judicial appointments under the President Obama administrations as a counterexample, meaning that when Congress was stacked with people who were opposed to his agenda, a lot of it came to a halt. And that's what we're wondering might happen in 2 years, is if Congress, one of the branches or both branches of Congress flips to the Democratic Party, whether they will really put the kibosh on a lot of the presidential powers, or not pass laws at least that support his agenda.
Yeah, I would kind of say that I do think we're in a moment where there is like relatively high executive power, and a lot of that does have to do with the other two branches ceding some of that power. The distinction I would make, though, is that I think the legislative is ceding power primarily because gridlock and partisanship has gotten so bad, and the incentives of Congress people have gotten so corrupted that Congress is a really ineffective branch in the current moment. It's really hard for them to get anything done. And that's been true for a few decades now. And so, in that inability to get anything done, they cede power to the executive. Whereas I would say the judicial branch is similarly ceding power to the executive, but that gets much more to this partisan question. And that, we have a Republican majority, several of which were, put in place by Republicans and do less than ideal means, right? The kind of immediate appointment of Amy Coney Barrett after Justice Ginsburg's death, and then the refusal of Mitch McConnell to allow a what's his name?
Advice and consent on Judge Garland.
Advice and consent on Judge Garland. Yeah, and so I would say that the judicial branch is currently almost kind of giving further executive power as a payback of sorts.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I'll just add that I also think it has to do inherently with how the executive is written in the Constitution compared to the other two branches. I mean, I think Congress in Article 1 has so many specific powers listed out that there are inherent constitutional limits that Congress can like run afoul of, whereas the president, it's a little bit less clear when the president is exceeding its authority. And so the judiciary oftentimes doesn't have as clear cut of a way to cut off the power as well. So all these there's a lot of like political checks that come from Congress instead of like constitutional formal checks. And if the politics are all aligned, then that check isn't going to be happening. Whereas the judiciary check on executive about the scope is also kind of limited because there's not a lot of like express powers limiting the executive's powers in the Constitution as well.
And I'll just say one other thing and overarching for this concept is uh, there's a case called Youngstown Sheet and Tube versus Sawyer in the 1950s, and there's a concurring opinion of Justice Jackson from that time that really explains sort of when Congress power ends and executive power begins, and it depends on what Congress has done in that arena. So we'll talk about that throughout the year, but that's a really important case on helping determine when it's an executive power and when it's a congressional power and how they butt up against each other.
Exactly. Okay, well, thank you all for the wonderful conversation. I want to move things along, give us a chance to go into the breakout rooms. So I'm going to open up the breakout rooms. There's going to be 6 breakout rooms. You'll be automatically assigned. It's a mix of people with schools from different schools. And you'll all have a chance to talk with a CACE member who will be in that room. And you'll all discuss what you think is the most powerful branch. Then we'll come back in 10 minutes. So at 12:57. We're going to come back. We're all going to vote really quickly and see who the most powerful branch is according to you all. So I'm going to open up the breakout rooms right now. If you have any trouble getting in for whatever reason, just message me and I will shoot you to the correct room. The rooms are open now.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good conversation in each of your breakout rooms. And once our host is back with us, we'll run the poll.
Okay, I'm just gonna make sure Everyone's back out from the breakout rooms. Looks like we have a few more seconds, so give them a sec. We're going to have a poll pop up, and in my experience, the video recording for YouTube purposes doesn't actually show the results of the poll, so you'll see me narrating the results as we go through. But now that we're all back, it looks like I'm going to open up the poll right now, and all of you should vote. And it tells me when people haven't voted, so everyone here has to vote, okay? I'm opening it right now. Oh. All right. So for those tuning in on YouTube, the question is, what is the most powerful branch of the federal government? And we are all voting via the poll on Zoom. You all are quick. We have 34 out of the 36 people have voted. Oh, okay, we have one more person left. One more.
It shows 100% for me. It's 35 out of 35.
Nope, we got 36 participants.
Is one of them you or?
I don't think so. It doesn't count to me because I
Okay.
opened the poll.
Well, mine says 35 out of 35.
I'm gonna give everyone 10 more seconds. Actually, that's too many seconds. Okay, I'm ending the poll, and the results are in. And this is fascinating. All right, we have a tie for second place between the legislative branch and the judicial branch, which is exactly a tie. 6 people voted legislative branch, 6 people voted judicial branch. And of course, first place with the remaining 23 votes, 66% of the vote, is the executive branch, which wins this year.
You got a super majority there, Sabrina.
Thank you. Thank you. Unlike you, ever. Legislative branch.
I won once or twice,
Yes.
maybe,
Yes.
years ago.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending Summer Session 1 and participating in the conversations, making it lively. Hopefully, you've got a sense of what this program is all about. And we are really excited to see you all for the next 2 summer sessions. I believe the next one is Sunday, July 27th. And I will be sending a reminder email to those who registered for it. I'll also be sending the link and information to your teachers. So if you don't get it for whatever reason, you can get it from your teachers as well. Really appreciate all of your time, and I'm going to let you go to enjoy the rest of your lovely Saturday.